Hi everyone. My name is Temi Tokwe Egbelakin, but normally I ask people to call me Temi for short. I'm the W120 coordinator for disasters and built environment. And then I want to use this opportunity to welcome you all to our monthly seminar series. And then we have one of our young and emerging researchers here who has finished a PhD and just recently, got a job at University of Sutherland. Is very dear to my heart. Okay, so before we continue, we have a tradition here that we normally do here in Australia, which is where we do a recitation about acknowledging our country. So I'll start with that today. So I acknowledge the Awakabo people as the traditional custodians of the land from which I'm joining today, the land on which the University of Newcastle, Callaghan campus is located. I also acknowledge that many of us are joining from different lands across Australia and beyond. I pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginals and Torres Strait Islanders people. We recognize that First Nation sovereignty was never ceded. This land always was and always will be the Aboriginal land. Thank you again, everyone. So at this moment, I would like to introduce our speaker, Dr. Buddhinie Ubesingha. If I pronounce that right, I've been practicing. I apologize if I missed it. Buddhinie Ubesingha. I've been practicing all day. So Dr. Buddhinie Ubesingha is an architect turned academic, although she's still architect, not fully academic, but doing both work with over 15 years of professional experience and more than 5 years in academia. She completed her university at South Bank University, where I actually met her, and we had a good time together there. Our research focuses on professionalism and ethics in post-disaster reconstruction. Our work addressed ethical and professional challenges faced by construction practitioners in post-disaster contexts, and our research aims to transform how construction professionals rebuild after disasters, both professionally and ethically. And I'm sure that if you have been on the field doing post-disaster reconstruction, you will appreciate the work that Dr. Buddhinie is doing. And then I welcome her to kickstart this seminar series today. Thank you very much, Dr. Buddhinie. You may have the floor.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you for having me too. So shall I straight away go to the presentation?
No, you can talk about yourself, but you can share your slide and talk about yourself and then go into the presentation.
All right, okay. I will first try to share my slides, and in the meantime, I will talk a little bit about myself. This, I hope you can see my slide.
Yes.
So this presentation is about rebuilding right, professionalism and ethics amidst post-disaster reconstruction chaos. As Professor Temi explained, that I come from an architecture background. So in year 2003, I entered into architecture school with the expectation of getting a chance to provide better living conditions for people. And exactly 1 year down, in year 2004, where I come from, Sri Lanka, experienced a Boxing Day tsunami. And so I saw the destruction it brought. I saw it myself. And I saw how people I saw the loss that it created, and I also saw the destruction that it brought to the built environment and our living habitats and so on. And I also saw how people were lost after this disaster, not being able to find their loved ones. Part of their families were buried under rubble, and they were trying to find where they were, and so on. So this gives a little bit of background into why I'm interested in researching and finding more about how we can rebuild right after disasters. So disasters don't happen just in one country. They are spread across the world. And this map shows the internal displacement caused due to disasters in year 2003, in 2023. So it's very well clear that the disasters are increasing, and the deaths due to disasters are also increasing. The economic loss due to disasters are also increasing. But we try to rebuild after these events. And it's often challenging. The post-disaster reconstruction challenges are directly related to professionalism and ethics. Issues related to integrity, corruption, poor skills and competency, so on, is not uncommon in this context. And PDR projects also tempt certain players to be very unprofessional and unethical due to the inherent qualities of post-disaster reconstruction. This context is very dynamic, and it's complex and chaotic, and it also creates various unusual problems. We will be encountering unusual problems in this context. Everything happens in a very time-compressed manner, and we also tend to override certain standard practices because that we need to expedite things in this context. And usually there is an influx of funds in this context too. So this research tried to look at how can professionalism and ethics be enhanced among professionals in post-disaster reconstruction projects. So why we need to look at this now? So we need to look at this now because we have an inevitable duty. More and more disasters are happening now. And because of that, more and more construction professionals have to now get engaged in post-disaster reconstruction. We have a duty to support these reconstruction. They face challenges persistently. Therefore, this post-disaster reconstruction often do not meet their intended needs. We also see a skill gap. We lack specific training unique for the pressures that we experience in post-disaster reconstruction work. This leads to competency gap, and therefore our professionalism is affected. We also experience an authority gap. To rebuild effectively, we need legitimacy, but we often lack that in the post-disaster context. So we lack authority, therefore our professionalism gets affected. In addition to all these things, we have an ethical imperative to do the right thing in this context, to our disaster survivors, to the organizations that we are attached to the people and to the nature. How can we do this? Have we got trained to do that? Do we have the right skill set to do that? Do we have the right ability to make decisions in this context to do the right thing? Is a question that we have to address in today's world when disasters are rising, deaths are rising. But unfortunately, these are the kind of things that we can see in press and in reports and so on, where post-disaster reconstruction projects are challenged in multiple dimensions. So I mentioned about professionalism and ethics. So it's worth looking at what this professionalism and ethics is. So professionalism is a well-argued and debated area. And we can think of classic professionalism and new professionalism as two different kinds of professionalism that's been discussed in the scholarly sphere. So classic professionalism looks at competence and authority, which I mentioned earlier. And the new professionalism also account other pressures such as commercialism and so on associated with professionalism. So in this research, we looked at professionalism as a sociologically grounded mode of occupational conduct characterized by specialized knowledge and regulatory control through professional associations, distinguishing professions from other occupations and legitimizing their privileged status within society. So this research defined professionalism in a way that is closer to the classic professionalism. So what is ethics? So ethics is a subset of morality, and morality dates back to the teaching of Aristotle and Plato and so on. Deontology, consequentialism, and virtue are some of the philosophies associated with ethics. Deontology is very rule-based, and the codes of ethics and the regulations that we are familiar with stem from this deontological philosophy. Consequentialism is outcome-based, and virtue ethics is more related to building a person who naturally would tend to be ethical because of the virtues that we develop from the childhood and early development itself. So in this research, ethics was viewed as a philosophical study of moral virtue and intellectual excellence, guiding individuals to cultivate virtuous character traits and practical wisdom to achieve human flourishing. So another thing that we cannot disregard when we think about professionalism and ethics is ethical culture. So ethical culture is a subset of organizational culture. This comes from organization theory, and it represents a multidimensional interplay among various formal and informal systems of behavioral control that are capable of promoting either ethical or unethical behavior. And ethical culture is positively associated to ethical behavior of employees. So in this research, we utilize classic professionalism, virtue ethics, and ethical climate theory to address our problem, to find out the challenges the professionals face when they're trying to be professional and ethical in post-disaster reconstruction, and to explore how we can enhance professionalism and ethics when they're trying to work in post-disaster reconstruction. This research adopted a mixed method approach. Therefore, we conducted a survey to identify challenges to professionalism and ethics. And we also conducted 5 case studies to address how we can enhance professionalism and ethics. For the survey, we got about 239 responses, and out of that, 170 were valid, and we utilized those 170 responses for the analysis. And case studies were conducted in 5 different countries. In Italy, we looked at reconstruction after earthquake L'Aquila. In Mozambique, reconstruction after cyclone Idai. In Indonesia, reconstruction after 2018 earthquake and tsunami. In Nepal, Kathmandu earthquake in 2015. And in Sri Lanka, reconstruction after 2016 slide in Kegol district. Our findings from the survey were analyzed using factor analysis, and case study findings were analyzed thematically. And this research also adopted an advanced framework of mixed method. Therefore, the quantitative and qualitative findings were analyzed separately, first of all, and they were interpreted at 2 instances. First of all, quantitative findings related to challenges, and the qualitative findings that we found related to challenge were interpreted, and thereafter qualitative findings related to how to enhance professionalism and ethics were analyzed separately, qualitatively, and interpreted thereafter. So what are our findings? So this research disclosed 6 challenges to professionalism and ethics of PDR professionals. We found out that disaster context itself is challenging, and it brings challenges to our professionalism and ethics. In addition to that, we found many other challenges. Administrative challenges were one of the things that affected professionalism and ethics, business-related challenges, competence-based challenges, social challenges, and some of the challenges stemmed from the professional institution itself that our professionals are attached to. So I will try to give a bit more details about these, but I will not go to explain all of them in details. You can ask me questions if you'd like to know further about these challenges. So if I focus on the disaster contextual challenges, these challenges happen due to poor preparedness and post-disaster complexities. Some of the notable findings are that poor data management during the early stage before the disaster occur itself affect the professionalism and ethics of our professionals, and certain post-disaster complexities like pre-existing complexities, some of the international interventions that happens in the post-disaster context, because those international interventions bring an extra layer of challenges. Emotional attachment is a novel finding because in certain instances, for example, in case of Italy, some of the professionals who were involved in post-disaster reconstruction are people who are from the same area who have got affected by the disaster. Therefore, they were genuinely trying to get involved in doing the right thing for their people, but often they have faced certain challenges because the people have labeled them as disaster victims, so that has brought in extra challenges and disappointment and so on when they're trying to do the right thing. And research attraction is another new finding that we identified. Professionals found it difficult when there are so many research going on, and when they portray issues differently to what exactly happens, which has brought additional challenges when they're trying to be professional and ethical in the post-disaster reconstruction context. Weak legal system and being able to navigate toxic administrative and political interventions have brought administrative challenges to professionalism and ethics. Outdated building codes, difficulty to implement law has brought challenges. In addition to that, poor administrative capacity, and also having administrative high-rank professionals and political personnel who are more towards self-serving rather than trying to do the right thing for people, have brought challenges to the professionalism and ethics of our professionals in the post-disaster context. Like that got disclosed from Indonesia, power struggle between NGOs and administration have brought in challenges, because in certain instances, the country itself has less power compared to the power that the NGO has. Therefore, there's been certain conflicts in these areas, which has affected the way our professionals work and their ability to do the right thing for the disaster survivors. Normalization of unethical conduct and toxic PDR organizations have brought business-related challenges to our professionals. Institutionalizing corruption, poor organizational capacity, and developing counter norms within the organization. And when the organizations are trying to look at short-term benefits and more profit-driven rather than trying to do the right thing. And when there are exploitative leaders within the organization, our professionals have been our professionals have found it very difficult to serve the people and to do the right thing when they are trying to reconstruct after post-disaster, reconstruct in the post-disaster context. When our professionals have incompatible skills and when they experience inadequate skill facilitation, once again, they have found it very challenging. It was well disclosed from the survey and the case studies that our professionals haven't had sufficient skills to respond to the needs in post-disaster context. Overemphasize technical competence and non-context oriented nature of the training that they have gone through, and the poor knowledge transfer and having poor soft skills or inadequate soft skills to navigate through the challenges have made them realize that they don't have the sufficient capacity and sufficient skills to respond. And in addition to that, they have often got poor support from the facilitators who conduct surveys, who conduct training programs for them. And so therefore the training programs haven't been quite as helpful for them to be very competent. In addition to that, having senior professionals who are inexperienced in post-disaster reconstruction also have brought challenges to their competence when they're trying to work in post-disaster reconstruction. Another challenge to professionalism and ethics is social related challenges. Having a weak society and the gender disparity that they experience have brought in another layer of challenges for their professionalism and ethics. When there's a negative social perception, and when the society knows very little about how to reconstruct or how to construct, it has been very difficult for our professionals to navigate, especially when it's owner-driven, when the owners are trying to reconstruct after disasters. In addition to that, in a dependent mentality of the people also have been creating issues when our professionals are trying to work, because irrespective of the efforts taken by the post-disaster reconstruction professionals, when the society is trying to get more due to the dependent mentality, it has been very difficult for our professionals to incorporate resilient features and to provide better living conditions for people. Socially embedded corruption has also brought in another layer of challenges. Male dominance, sometimes which has led to child abuse within post-disaster reconstruction context, also has been very challenging and brought in disturbances. This also has led to create secondary trauma among post-disaster reconstruction professionals. So it has affected the way they work and their ability to serve the people who need their support. In addition to that, due to the poor engagement of professional institutions, our professionals have not got the support that they expected. And in addition to that, there has been issues related to licensing and the process that has been adopted, especially in countries like Indonesia, for licensing. Therefore, people had to navigate challenges that stemmed due to poor licensing systems in certain countries. So these are the main challenges that we encountered when our professionals were trying to be professional and ethical. In addition to that, this research also disclosed how we can be professional and ethical, how we can enhance our ability to be professional and ethical when we are trying to rebuild. So this can happen by ensuring adequate knowledge and skills are there. The wider ethical climate support enhancing professionalism and ethics in post-disaster reconstruction context. Individual morality also support enhancing professionalism and ethics. So I will try to move on to knowledge and skills and how it enhances professionalism and ethics. If we have the right kind of education, education which is interdisciplinary and pragmatic, and if we ensure there's adequate research and knowledge transfer, that is going to enhance the professionalism and ethics. PDR competence is also important, and training, coaching, and mentoring is going to support PDR competence and ability to move beyond donor-centric motivations, support PDR competence. One of the things inherent to post-disaster reconstruction is that reconstruction appear to run in a donor-centric movement. It was disclosed that our professionals have the ability and the right kind of skills to move beyond these donor-centric motivations and to reconstruct right. So why the ethical climate is another thing that can enhance professionalism and ethics. Earlier on, I mentioned about ethical climate, which most of the time is associated to the organization. One of the novel findings of this research is that we should extend that ethical climate beyond the organization setting to the wider environment that we work. So a value-conscious PDR culture is important here. One of the new findings is that media interventions then create value-conscious PDR culture. The literature often refers to media interventions as a problem, but instead this research disclosed that media interventions is a good thing, and it cultivates a value-conscious PDR culture, because when our professionals are on the media watch, they tend to try to do the right thing because they don't want media to give publicity to mistakes that they do. And good organization culture, as suggested by the organization theory, is important, and organizations should implement their code of ethics, and having capable leaders and resilient recruitment processes and appropriate rewarding system and so on support having a good organization culture which enhance professionalism and ethics of post-disaster reconstruction professionals. Active professional institutions which implement code of ethics and provide PDR guidance support. In addition to that, in the case of Nepal, it is identified that professional institutions can be agent of social responsibility. They can train professionals for post-disaster reconstruction needs, and they can deploy them when needed. And those trained professionals that they deploy can work as a catalyst in this environment. Having a fair market is needed for ethical post-disaster reconstruction. Most of us know that in the post-disaster context, there's a shortage of building materials and so on. So we should address these things by enterprise development and so on. And institutional mechanism has to be there in place to prevent price gouging, so that our professionals has the environment that supports them to promote new building materials, new building technologies that can make buildings more resilient and also they also can bring the cost, reconstruction cost down. They serve better when they are in post-disaster reconstruction. Good governance is important. In order to create a good governance, our research disclosed that we can utilize the power of social capital, and we can ensure there's collaboration between government and NGOs for capacity building and so on. This is particularly relevant countries if their administrative capacity is less, and effectively enforce legal systems, create a wide ethical climate, strict laws and building regulations positioned and to address the needs and implementation of them, create this wide ethical climate. Strong social capital, in addition to using the power of social capital to create a good governance, the networks within the social capital also can be utilized, and they support an ethical climate, developing social trust, empowering the community, providing construction skills for the community, including for women, because in instances like in the case of Mozambique, the women also had to get involved in reconstruction. So empowering women by providing construction skills, basic construction skills, supports. Emotional attachments is another new finding. Professionals have found that they have better ability to serve when they are emotionally attached to the post-disaster chaos. This got disclosed from a couple of countries, from Italy and from Nepal. In addition to that, as got disclosed from Sri Lanka, religious cultural interventions also have supported creating a wide ethical climate, because they have provided support for our professionals by ensuring that humanity is thought of and brought into the post-disaster reconstruction context. And they also have got a certain amount of self-satisfaction by getting involved in post-disaster reconstruction. This satisfaction have allowed them to do the right thing when they're in the post-disaster setting. Individual morality also support to enhance professionalism and ethics. Having an ethical upbringing, incorporating ethics and value-based education from the early childhood development itself supports. Healthy exposure, being aware of life options, and getting an opportunity to work in much more ethical context, ethical countries have been very supporting for our professionals to do the right thing, even when they are facing lots of challenges in the post-disaster context. So I talked about 3 different ways to enhance professionalism and ethics. That is knowledge and skills, wide ethical climate, and the individual morality. In addition to that, this research disclosed that this should happen in a relativist global context, because PDR operates in a globalized pluralistic setting. So therefore, this one rule for all policies doesn't quite work well in post-disaster reconstruction setting. And ethical judgments are not absolutes, and they need to be adapted to the cultural framework where the post-disaster work getting executed. So this research suggests that we should be looking at a moderate relativist environment. We shouldn't be going to the extreme of relativism. Instead, we should be very moderate, and we should establish these 3 pathways to enhance professionalism and ethics within this relativist global context. This research also affirmed that PDR follows a project-based approach, and this affirmed that they are extremely complex due to heightened social, political, economic, and global significance. And these projects are of national importance. They have far-reaching development impacts, and they operate under significant public and media attention. They achieve high-profile status on global platforms. Therefore, given the scale, this large scale, and the socio-economic impact they bring than typical construction projects, and the multi-layered challenges that post-disaster reconstruction projects encounter, and the opportunity that post-disaster reconstruction bring to be the catalyst for national development, these large-scale post-disaster reconstruction can be identified as post-disaster mega redevelopment projects because they have characteristics more akin to mega projects. So, the novelty of this research is the relativist adaptation, which I explained before, and the theoretical regain, because this synthesized multiple theories and it bridged moral virtue, ethical climate, and professionalism. A practical relevance of this research, because the focus on knowledge and skills, morality, and ethical climate provides actionable pathways for PDMR professionals. And the interdisciplinarity, because this research connects post-disaster mega reconstruction with other pluralistic environments such as bioethics, healthcare, and public relations. So we may be able to utilize some of the concepts that's discussed in its other domains to address our problem. This research also contributes to knowledge in interdisciplinary manner. It contributes to built environment literature by introducing ethical climate theory. It also empirically validates virtue ethics and professional competence in post-disaster reconstruction and developed the first ethical approach for globalized PDMR context. This contributes to disaster scholarship by addressing ethics gaps in humanitarian rebuilding efforts, provide a structured approach to strengthening professionalism and ethics. This research also contributes to ethical climate theory, moral theory, and theory of professionalism. In addition, this contributes to policy making and practice as well. When it comes to policy, we have to think of value-based education reform and ethical workforce development, systemic ethical climate, and legislative and institutional innovation. When it comes to practice, pre-disaster capacity building is important. Individual professionalism can bring more benefits for us, and organizational leadership and sector-wide collaboration has to be thought of. So this research led to a couple of publications, and you can access them. The links are given here. And also got a couple of awards, including one of the CIB awards earlier on. And so what we can do next? So our future research can look at some concepts that would allow us to address certain needs in this space. We can think of interdisciplinary research, more interdisciplinary research on enhancing professionalism and ethics in post-disaster context. Knowledge and skill development is another area that we can focus on. Ethical climate and governance, individual morality and resilience, and systemic challenges. And some of these things may appear not so familiar to us, but they don't appear strange to the scholarly debates and the scholarly environment. We could bring in certain theories from other domains and disciplines, like new professionalism, ethical relativism, knowledge management theories, and so on, to address our problems that our professionals face when they're trying to be ethical and professional in these post-disaster reconstruction interventions. So I'm very open to collaboration. So these are my contact details. You can get through to me. And if you have more questions, you can reach out to me through these contact details. In addition to that, if you have any questions, I will be very happy to answer them as much as possible right now too.
Thank you very much. Dr. Buddhinie, we've got a couple of questions. Some have been sent to me directly. And that was a very good presentation. Thank you for doing that. We appreciate it. We've learned a lot from you. I just want to use this opportunity to acknowledge Professor Fori. He's Buddhinie's mentor and also supervisor. Just to let you know, he was my supervisor a long, long time ago. So thank you, Professor Fori, for joining us today. I know this is very early, so we appreciate all your time. So one of the first questions I got from the audience is, I'll just read it out and you can just provide some answers to it. Would there be a difference between PDR, post-disaster reconstruction, after a nature-based disaster, short duration, unexpected, and PDR after a prolonged period of war, like a disaster like war, like Ukraine, Gaza? So we can use earthquake, flooding as an example of nature-based, and then also war in Ukraine and Gaza as prolonged. And how can we use the lessons learned to be more effective in the latter case, which is in a prolonged period of war that we're actually experiencing now? So, I think the globally we're experiencing these two scenarios. So please, the floor is yours to answer that question.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that question. So this research focused on other type of disasters. Why I'm trying to use the word other type of disasters rather than conflicts is we now tend to believe that it's not quite right to call these type of disasters natural disasters because people argue that they are not natural. They are not natural. These things happen due to human interventions. So this research focused on the climate-induced disasters, and when it comes to crisis, human conflicts, and so on, those disasters and disasters induced by climate change and so on has similar characteristics. So therefore, post-conflict scenario is also very chaotic and complex. It's very similar to post-disaster that I looked at. So therefore, certain things like certain challenges such as administrative pressure that post-conflict scenario encounter, gaps in our education, competency gaps, authority gaps, and so on, are very similar to the post-conflict situation as well. So therefore, most of these challenges and ways to enhance these challenges and overcome those challenges can be applied into post-conflict situation as well. However, as far as I know, an explicit research addressing the post-conflict scenario and how to overcome the challenges relates to professionalism and ethics in the post-conflict scenario has not been done so far. But it can be one of the things that we can do in the future. But we can definitely utilize the outcome of this research as the base to address the post-conflict situation too. Yes.
Thank you very much. We've got another question. I think this is from one of our participants as well. He said, given how quite a good part of the presentation discusses ethics, does this mean that one of the core issues in rebuilding is pure human greed? So probably say corruption and mitigating, mitigating corruption in time of need. So he's asking, how does corruption influence post-disaster reconstruction?
Thank you for that question. Is this pure greed? Based on the insights I developed by conducting this research, corruption and the greed plays a role in post-disaster reconstruction, but that alone is not the problem. Due to systemic challenges that we face. Corruption being part of the system, therefore people tend to believe that's the way it is. They don't see this as a problem. And sometimes they have to navigate certain challenges and address certain challenges related to corruption, following the systems applicable in those countries and the way the society looks at those issues. Therefore, corruption plays a role, but corruption itself is not the only reason. There are competency gaps, gaps in our education system, gaps in our early moral development, which are slightly far from the concept of corruption. Corruption plays a huge role. Our greed, yes, I think it plays a huge role too. And some of our participants in interviews, they disclosed about what happens. People need more benefits, and when they are not appropriately paid, and when they have the need to make more money, the avenues that they choose to go for, and so on. Corruption plays a role, greed plays a role. In addition to that, there are much more complexities that we have to address in this situation if we're looking at the wider picture of professionalism and ethics in post-disaster reconstruction. Yeah. And I hope
how do we mitigate? Sorry to cut you short. How do we mitigate it? How do we mitigate, in terms of the findings that you found in your study? How can, corruption be mitigated?
How can corruption be mitigated? Yes. So in order to mitigate corruption, we need systemic interventions because corruption is part of the society in most countries that I did this inquiry in. So therefore, in order to mitigate, virtue ethics becomes helpful. Developing people who value doing the right thing. So irrespective of how corrupted the society that you work in, you still be able to stand against those things and try and do the right thing instead of following what is commonly practiced. If certain acts of corruption are commonly practiced in that environment. And education system plays a role because as got disclosed from this research, training people and upbringing people and having a value-based education system allow and create much more ethical professionals. So therefore, they have the ability to combat against the corruption. In order to lessen corruption, mitigate. I'm not sure whether we can mitigate it like the way it's happening now. In order to lessen the corruption, we need systemic interventions. In order to overcome the issues that the professionals face due to corruption, we need a better early moral foundation. Yeah.
Anyway, thank you very much. And I think another way to do that is also to have tighter contracting, having using technology as well to reduce issues around corruption so that you can improve transparency. So this is one of my QS students, telling me that at the moment. Anyway, I've got one last question before we go. I know we are running out of time. How can organizations balance the urgency of rapid reconstruction that we normally have post-disaster with the need to maintain high standard of professionalism and ethical decision-making? How can organizations, balance that, especially when, immediately after an emergency situation, we have a lot of NGOs coming in, putting money down to say, okay, let's do this, How can construction professionals balance this? How do we maintain that high standard when there's an issue of urgency to rebuild?
Thank you for that question. Because organizations play a huge role in this context. This is where organization theory comes into place, where create an ethical climate within organization, support post-disaster reconstruction. Organizations face enormous pressure from outside. Therefore, organizations should have a structure within the organization, a resilient structure that can withstand these kind of pressure. And in addition to that, the leadership within the organization should be strong, so that they can implement better interventions to navigate challenges that they face in post-disaster reconstruction. In addition to that, creating an informal culture within the organization which support right conduct, irrespective of the pressure that they face, is also important. When we look at more tangible things like having a code of ethics, set of guidance, and having mentors within the organization, and having role models within the organization is also important.
Oh, thank you very much. I think you have another question here. I was going to round up before. Kristen says, if there is time for another question, yeah, through research in 5 countries, were there any examples of best practices that could be shared? What are the best practices that you have heard from people that have been talking about what they've done right during post-disaster in order to ensure ethical work between, the school? What are the best? Just give us 3 examples of best practices.
Thank you for that question. So, various countries have adopted different approaches and certain practices that supports them. So, from if I recall findings from Indonesia, one of the practice that they utilize is that in order to navigate the administrative pressure, the pressure that they get from the governance structure, pressure they get from politicians and so on, the leaders in post-disaster reconstruction have built a different mechanism when they try to get involved in post-disaster reconstruction. They have the practice of gathering information as much as possible, so that when there are political interventions and governance interventions or administrative interventions which do not support right practices, they have used the information, the data that they have to justify that that's not the way things should be done. This is the way things should be done. And if I recall best practices from Indonesia, some more good practices from Indonesia, they also use the feedback mechanisms to avoid difficult interventions that come from administrative structure and political structure within the organization. If they were challenged, they have used the voice of people, the power of people, the social capital that I talk about, to navigate these obstacles. Some more best practices, drawing from the findings that we encountered from Sri Lanka, they have utilized religious interventions to make sure that the people remain calm during post-disaster reconstruction, because these people have got affected. They have survived the disaster, but they go through psychological trauma. So in order to address those issues, before the post-disaster reconstruction commenced, Sri Lanka has incorporated religious interventions, which has brought some psychological relief to the disaster survivors, which has made things easy for post-disaster reconstructions when they're trying to navigate with survivors to reconstruct after disasters. So these are some of the best practices that I can think of.
Thank you very much, Buddhinie. We are quite running out of time. That was very good. We appreciate your time. We appreciate everything you've done today, especially sharing knowledge around post-disaster reconstruction. Issues around ethics immediately after disaster has been something that, we've been re-echoing in the industry and also in the academia. And thank you for sharing this wealth of knowledge with us. Just an update. Next month, we are having another seminar by Delanta, which is on actually integrating artificial intelligence into DRR, looking at a global perspective, a global insight from Australian multi-sector adoption. And we're keen to learn more about this because this is the era of disaster and also the era where technology actually meets disaster risk reduction. And we hope you'll be able to join us. Please do register to join us on this wonderful presentation that we'll be expecting. And then if you miss this session or you want to go back again to review it, we've got our social media. We got our YouTube channel for W120, where you can actually go back and then look at look at these videos and then do more learning. And also, please help us share it within your network if anybody's willing to learn more about what Buddhinie has shared. And we're also currently engaging a wider community through live and virtual events, which is one of the things that we've shared today, recorded sessions, online discussion board and forums. And just to let anybody here who is not a member yet, we have free membership available for students of any CIB corporate member association and also individual members as well. Not a lot of money, please. You can go to the CIB website and check. We're looking to collaborate at a wider, as an entity, as also to collaborate with anyone who is yet not a member. And then you can have access to a lot of our resources as well through W120. So please visit CIB website for more details. And also reach out to me if you want to present any of your work or you want your work to reach a wider audience. We're open to anyone in the disaster or disaster risk reduction network to join us and then, share the wealth of the knowledge that they have learned. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you to another exciting seminar next month. Thank you very much, everyone.